Just begin now. Kia ora, everyone. Look, thank you very much for giving up your valuable time today. We very much look forward to hearing what you've got to say. So if everyone could just introduce themselves and then we'll get right into it. John and Tom, would you like to start off introducing yourself?
So apologies, we're slightly dark. We look like we're on Crime Watch over here. This is a classic Wellington day. So John Thompson on this side. I'm the submitter and owner of 200 Parkville Road in Pūroro.
And I'm Tom Anderson. I'm a planning consultant at Insight and a bit of work with John and advising him on his submission.
Thank you. Thomas.
Thanks.
I assume that's me. I'm known as Brent.
So apologies.
My name is Brent Layton. I have 3 adjacent blocks of land in South Pūroro Road, which people would call lifestyle blocks, but in fact regenerating bush blocks.
Great. And Eleonora.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa mihi nui mihi ana, ko Eleonora toku ingoa. I have a property between South Pūroro Road and Longali Station.
Great, thank you. Fleur.
Kia ora, my name's Fleur Fitzsimons. I'm the councillor for the Paikawakawa Southern Ward. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. Simon.
Hi there all, kia ora. I'm Simon Wolf and I'm probably most of your local councillor for Whārangi Onslow Western.
Jenny.
Good hato, I'm Jenny Condi. I'm the councillor for Takapū Northern Ward. I live out in Tawa.
Terry.
Kia ora anō. I'm Councillor Terry O'Neill and I represent Te Motukarangi East Suburbs. I'm a renter in Haitaitai.
Thanks. And Heidi.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Heidi Mueller from Democracy Services.
Thank you. And finally, Adam.
Kia ora everyone, Adam McCutcheon from the District Plan team at Wellington City Council. Great,
thank you. So kia ora everyone, I'm one of these councillors for Pukehino and the chairperson of the Planning Committee. So like I say, we really look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Who would like to go first? We'll just give everyone about 5 minutes to do their thing and then there'll be time for questions and discussion. I'll pick randomly. Oh, right, no, John and Tom. Great.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks very much for having us today and for assembling everybody. We really appreciate your time and appreciate that you've got thousands of submissions to discuss. So we feel a bit privileged to be in front of you today, so thank you. So as mentioned, I'm the owner of the property, which is 200 Parkville Road in Karori, and also Otari and also Makara. The property in total is just shy of 340 hectares across 8 different lots. And the lot that we're referring to today is known as Lot 7, which is approximately 56 hectares in size. And it's got dual access from both Parkville Road and Montgomery Avenue, both in Karori. The site itself has got resource consent already for 5 new residential lots, and it's got 3 existing residential dwellings as part of the property, both very, very close to the terminus of Parkville Road. And there's 2 additional lots which are accessed through right-of-way through this part of the property, which service 2 dwellings, which is just essentially to the south of the subject site. So essentially, the property is essentially behaving as a residential context insofar as the council has identified its future development potential with the 5 new residential lots and with the 3 existing houses, plus the 2 new houses which are accessed from the property. Our feeling is that with the 5 new residential lots that we currently have resource consent for, and this is for I'd purchase property, it doesn't really suit both the current demand for housing because the lots themselves are 500 to 600 square meters, which from a development perspective essentially means that it's not an affordable lot. And we feel that there's far higher and better use of the land And so for us, we're looking at creating more efficient use of the land, and we're looking to change the zone from rural reflect the current use of land, and also better reflect the highest and best use of the land.
I think we're having some broadband issues. Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, you're cutting out a little bit. I think Simon's pointed out that the broadband is under heavy demand at the moment.
Okay, right. Was it something that you simply missed, or should
Yeah,
I go back to the start?
So you just basically want to change from rural to residential?
Correct. Yes. Yeah, that's right. In one part of the site, and then to the sort of southwest, there's another part of the lot that we're looking at, large lot residential, and Tom will talk a little bit about that. So maybe I could pass over to Tom after that.
Certainly, yeah. So when John first came to me with the proposal looking at getting a greater residential yield out of the area at 200 Parkvale, which is actually from Parkvale Road, and also potential large lot residential off Montgomery Ave, I look at the operative district plan, and it's a very difficult site to develop under its current rural zoning. Yet, as John said, that the existing context of the dwellings, particularly on the Parkvale Road site, and on it's 8,000, John, that using the land for residential purposes doesn't intensively change its character, yet it provides a greater housing supply in the area, which is kind of why I think my professional support to what John is trying to achieve. So the servicing is obviously there, because we've got direct road access. Within the road there is stormwater, wastewater, so on and so forth. And the more efficient use of the site through providing residential zoning rather than relying on existing resource consents is, I think, a better outcome with significantly changing the appearance of what we're intended for.
Okay. Is that the end of your submission? We're having some more problems with broadband. I think we are having some problems. Right, what we'll do, oh no, are you back?
Are we?
Yes, you're back now.
Okay, as I was just getting into the higher order documents which apply to the site as well, which are the housing and business capacity assessments, the NPSUD, in terms of, is this an appropriate piece of land to be rezoned from? To do that. So that's my view of why that I think it's appropriate for residential use of the land as opposed to rural.
Sorry, again, you were cutting out a little bit. So you reckon the higher order documents do support the rezoning?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, right. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, that's it in a nutshell in terms of the Parkvale Road side. The only thing to add around Montgomery Ave is the large lot proposal to zone that land large lot residential aligns with what I think the intent of the district plan is for large lot residential zoning, and that it's directly on that periphery of residential zone land before it becomes rural.
Okay, thank you. Right, Brent or Eleonora, who would like to go next, and then we'll have questions.
Happy for Eleanor to go next, or me?
You can go if you want.
Right,
Okay.
right, I'll take Brent.
Hello, Eleanor. Good to see you again. At any rate, I have these 3 blocks of land in South Pūroro Road, which are all north facing, and I've made a submission on 3 different areas of the draft district plan, on the ridgeline and hilltops policy, on the SNA policy, and on the proposal to designate all my land, including the stuff under my bedroom, as a significant area, a special amenities landscape. I put in a series of submissions about what I would like to have. I'm not seeking a change in the underlying zoning of the land. Rural is fine with me, but I do want the removal of the areas of my land that are subject to the ridgelines and hilltops policy to be taken away from that. And the reason is it's not a hilltop and it's not a ridgeline that is prominent. And I sent the council a large number of photos. What I did was I went round the area in every place with public access and took photographs of my property. And from those photographs, you can conclude it's not a significant ridgeline. The policy doesn't actually have a clear objective, but if the objective is to mean that ridgelines don't have buildings on them, because this would be obtrusive to the views of things, the policy is not rightly directed at my land. I think somebody sat in an office, not realized that behind my land from one direction is the land that has Hawkins Hill, and in the other direction, the Macra Peak mountain biking park, and the short and the low ridgeline that I own part of is actually quite indistinct. In terms of the special amenities landscape, I want that designation removed from all of my land, and if that's not possible, changes to what's permitted on it. In terms of the designation, special amenities landscape, I don't see it as particularly special, either in terms of the shape of the land. There's lots of land around Wellington like that, which is relatively flat tops with very steep gullies leading down into the valleys. In my case, it's the gully really is on one side of the land, it's Long Gully, and on the other side of the land, it is the Pūroro stream. But there's a couple of tributaries as well going into the Pūroro stream. So it's not, I think, special amenity landscape in any particular form. But to designate the whole area as a blanket like that, and to have restrictions which are really designed to promote natural vegetation around houses and under houses and gardens and so forth is, I think, way over the top and not necessary. I can't see how the ridgeline, how the zoning at the present under rural would actually deal with any of the issues the council may perceive that they have in relation to that. Personally, I think it's a policy designed to effectively create an outer ring park around the city without paying for it. And I think that's inappropriate. If they want to buy the land, they can try, but I'm quite happy owning it at the moment and having the bush regenerate. In terms of significant natural areas, the plan that came out actually did say I had some significant natural areas, but I've confirmed with council that they had mislocated the significant natural area. They're all on the boundaries of my place. I won't say very much. I've read the submissions. It's clearly been rubbish, that policy. It's going to have undesirable consequences. It's going to stop people from effectively regenerating bush because the price that they'll pay for that, the benefit they'll get, is to effectively have their land made into a park without being paid for it. So I am opposed to that. I think in terms of the last two, well, all of these policies, the issue that the council really needs to focus on is if you start tying up so much land, and there's a lot of kororis and reserves, Mountain Bike Park, the Natural Heritage Trust, Zealandia, the Wrights Hill, the Skyline, the Karori Park, and then there's covenanted land next to me at 247 South Karori Road, extensive covenanted land there. So in one form or other, there's more land around Karori in parks than there is actually places that are taken up by houses or shops. And the key issue that I think this community is actually facing is the affordability of housing in the future. Now, the recent boost has been the result of policies at the Reserve Bank, but the underlying long-term issue is the lack of availability of land in the area for development and for people to actually live on. The idea that people are all going to live in high-rises in central Wellington, I think, is nonsense. It's not going to happen. And even living in high rises by transport centres is not going to happen. We don't need only high rises. We need a range of living environments for people in order for it to be a desirable city to live in. I personally think the council needs to do quite a bit of work on what reserves it already has and what ratio of reserves to actual urban areas would be desirable, and that the residents would actually be willing to pay for it directly and indirectly. It's very easy to say, well, we want another reserve if it's being paid for by the landowner and not by you. But if you have to actually face the trade-offs, it's quite high. And at the moment, I think we're getting to the point where unless you inherit or you have a very high paid government or local government job, your chances of living in Wellington are remote. As a colleague of mine at the Institute of Economic Research told me 10 years ago, there are no cleaners living in Wellington. And the situation has got significantly worse. So I think that underlying all of these policies is locking up land, trying to create reserves. Yes, there needs to be reserves, but there needs to be a balance between reserves and affordability.
Thank you. Very clear. Eleonora.
Hi. I do support what Brent just said, want to say, and I'm sure councillors will be aware that there was a petition on change.org against SNA, which got more than 2,000 signatures. And then the person that initiated the petition, unfortunately, couldn't submit it on time. So there's a real opposition to SNA. You'll be across this. My submission is based on the fact that I do understand that, I mean, although I don't want the SNA because it takes over 80% of my property where I wouldn't be able to do anything. My petition is, I do understand that there's a commitment that local government has made, and it's connected to the Resource Management Act about having to identify and protect significant natural areas. So I do see the reasoning why, I can see why you're going this way. I do think, though, that the council is probably not the best institution to be managing further resource consent and exceptions and be able to go out and actually visit all this land to identify which one is an SNA, which one is not. Manuka and Kanuka, for example, now have been excluded from an SNA. So there's only, for example, my property, certain trees amongst the Manuka and the Kanuka that I would have to protect, but the entire land gets blanketed out. If you were to go ahead with the SNA, you'd need to change how you define the SNA and how you actually apply rules around it, because otherwise the compliance burden for council and the cost to owners will just make it impossible for you to do. So in my submission, what I was seeking is, in the absence of scrapping the SNAs completely, if you have to go ahead with the SNAs, you'd need to change some rules. And the rules would be to support the sustainable use of the land for farming, for beekeeping, so that people can live sustainably off the land. So at the moment, for example, there's no provision for non-toxic pest control. So if I were to reach my traps, which we have like a few dozen traps across the land along tracks and so on, I wouldn't be able to get a track down to the traps. There's an assumption that people will just drop a bunch of poison from the air, or they'll be shooting goats and pests from the air. There's also an assumption in there. So you'd have to change the rules to allow the creation, management, maintenance of pathways to support non-toxic pest control and trapping on all lands. My second note is that there's beekeeping and other similar low impact agricultural activities or pastoral activities or horticultural activities. They should all be permitted activities within an SNA. Otherwise, this, people will try and do it anyway. The neighbors will call on council. Council will have to send someone out. They will have to say, is this beehive near a Manuka tree or closer to the other tree, which is a protected species? Do you have to cut anything to reach the beehive? So it just becomes really complicated. So beekeeping and low impact horticultural, agricultural activities should be permitted. You would want to clarify that in the permitted activities description, landowners can use machinery to support permitted activities, and that's including fencing. So at the moment, if I were to fence my land, which we're trying to do over the course of the years, it's a very expensive exercise. We have about 2.5 kilometers of boundaries. If I were to do that by hand, I mean, honestly, I don't know, we'd have to go back to slavery. I would have to have like 150 people working full-time at no cost to anybody, being fed and clothed to actually do this by hand. So it's, you know, once you have a certain size of rural land, you need to be able to have machines on site, and it needs to be a permitted activity, because otherwise the process of getting any type of consent approved for my land and most of the rural land in Wellington is really complicated. Unless it's a permitted activity, it becomes a discretionary activity. Council can take an unlimited period of time to respond to a request. So I know of people who submit their request for a discretionary activity 3 years ago, and they're still waiting to hear back from council, even for like a further information request. So permitted activity description should allow the use of machinery, and that should include fencing. You want to provide for the trimming and the removal of vegetation, including the creation, maintenance, and upgrade of farm access tracks, and they have to be up to 4 meters wide. At the moment, you propose to have 2 meters wide, which again presupposes that someone is going to do this by hand or with a very tiny digger. While when you have a piece of land like us, we have 45 hectares, or someone else, I mean, on this call, people have a lot of a lot of rural land. To create a track, you need whatever digger you can get, and usually it's relatively big. So the digger itself is bigger than 2 meters. You can't have a track that is 2 meters wide. You need to make the tracks 4 meters at least. And there's also the fact that there's land contours considerations. So Wellington contours are particularly, as Brent was saying, and I'm sure John and everyone would agree on this. You cannot necessarily follow the boundary line. It's not like a flat piece of land. Sometimes the digger will need to go in and out and follow the contours of the land. That should be permitted no matter what happens with the SNAs, because otherwise you make it essentially impossible for us to fence our land, which defeats the purpose of the pest control and of trying to manage the land. Fencing boundaries, therefore, should be a permitted activity, and they should be allowed to follow the land contours where it's not reasonably practical to follow the exact boundary lines. You'd want to enable clearance up to 10 meters from the external wall and the roof of a building. This should be, which is more than what you currently allow for SNA. You also need to include farm accessory buildings in this definition. At the moment, your definition of an SNA building is only for residential buildings. But when we're talking about rural land, we have at the moment and forever, given the changes to the Building Act last August, the ability to have an unlimited number of farm accessory buildings to support rural activities up to more than 800 square meters of total coverage. If you don't let us clear the vegetation around those buildings, if machinery are not allowed to reach the buildings, then you sort of what you're doing with the SNAs is contradicting what the Building Act changes of 2020 tried to achieve, which was to make farming and rural activities a bit simpler for people and reduce the burden of compliance and costs. At the moment, also, you're not allowing landowners to do their own flood protection and natural hazard controls, which is why people are also so upset. So like if I had a problem and there was a fire hazard or recent rains, you know, half of the tracks that fell down the hill, I wouldn't be able to do what I'd had to do this time, which was to call a digger, get the digger in, dig it out, make sure that the roads were okay, and make sure that I could rebuild parts of the hill where they had like slid into the valley. None of that would be a permitted activity for me, which of course would block my access of the land. I would technically not have been able to go in and out. Because it's a permitted activity now, I was able to call the digger, and in 48 hours, we were able to go in and out. If I had to have gone to council, imagine what would have happened. Literally everyone on a rural piece of land or an SNA land that had any type of damage from the rain would have had to go through council to get permission to do that on their own, or they would have had to call a third party and pay them a lot of money to give them some sort of like hazard management plan that then would have to be carried out a particular way with the cost of site visits and so on. So essentially, I have this like 7 key changes. If you were to really go ahead with this, you would have to change the rules around how you go about it, because otherwise it will be really not feasible. The other thing is we have a mortgage like many other people. And when we took the mortgage, there was, of course, an assessment done on the value of the land by the bank and a third party independent as evaluator. If you do the changes, you'd have to come and actually do at no cost to us the full assessment of the extent of the SNA. At the moment, the proposed SNAs, they are a desktop exercise. Someone would have to come, they would have to go through like my 45 hectares of manuka, kanuka and scattered vegetation and identify exactly what needs to be protected, because otherwise, you know, what am I going to tell my bank? Who's going to help us pay the mortgage rate? It's just not really doable. The other thing to do is that at the moment, the purpose of the SNA, you are very focused on protected natives. And in a way, you have to balance, as Brent was saying, some of those trades off, right? Like you have to understand if what you're protected is natives, or if what you want to do is actually address the impact of climate change and just have just more vegetation in general. And this is because there's been a change in the approach to this. Up until a few years ago, successive governments, including this government, you know, the previous version of the Labour government, they were keen to plant, and you didn't have to plant natives, you just have to plant, which of course was okay with farming. We could plant food and that would actually be okay. But the moment you go with the SNA and you decide to interpret that as we need to protect the natives and nothing else, what you're effectively doing is stopping us from being able to farm our land, which is why we bought the land. So there will be also a trade-off in the long run. If you go out now and you try to buy veggies in Wellington, I don't know where they're coming from, you have the potential, and they're quite expensive, right? You have the potential of having a rural basin that it's not out in the Wairarapa. You have the potential for people to be self-sufficient like we are trying to do and others nearby by growing our own food. If you stop that, because we need to protect the natives, how do we make that trade-off? For us, we're trying to find a balance and work around the trees that we see are quite big and significant and quite beautiful. Sometimes they're not protected by you, but they are quite beautiful. Our intention, of course, is to respect the land. That's why we bought it. I do not intend to develop the land, but I do understand that others may want to do that, but that's not the case for me. You'd have to give us a bit of room not to have to come to council every 5 minutes to be able to do what we want to do.
Is that the end of your submission?
That's the end of my submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really detailed and very helpful. Yeah, Terry, would you like to go first? And then we might ask Adam to give a bit of a response. I think that might be helpful.
Thank you so much for all your submissions. My main focus, I guess, I used to hold the natural environment portfolio and did a lot of work with backyard taonga and understanding SNAs. And one of the things that we're consulting on in the district plan is what makes SNAs attractive to landowners like yourselves, or if there any, rather than the stick, what carrots could we give to kind of maybe, Eleonora, support, you know, farming your own food sources on the land. Bees, I'm a beekeeper myself. I'm quite excited about those things, and I would think that it would be an incentive to have bees around native trees because they help repollinate. So my question to the submitters is, what things could the council do to help you realise a vision of some native regenerating bush, but still allow you to do the things that you want to do, whether it's rates rebate, supporting with fencing, supporting with free native plants. And then, yeah, I'd love to hear Adam's response to maybe some of the things we can do as council to support.
I do have a couple of comments there, if I may. I didn't have my hand up, so, and I don't have a lot of visibility.
We've got quite a small group.
Yeah, I think rate rebates would definitely be useful. It's also true that you may want to consider that if someone actually runs their land as a park, you give them the possibility of charging people or allowing that as a permitted activity. at the moment, what you're doing is locking all these areas. But if I were to do a bike track and get someone to come and have a look, I literally would be breaking the law. So, and the consent to change and have, I don't know, educational activities or environmental activities on a piece of rural land are very, very cumbersome, very expensive. They require thousands and thousands of dollars of reports from third parties. So if you'd made that simpler, that would go a long way towards, you know, ultimately though, you do need to actually have the resources to send people out and be able to reasonably negotiate which trees you actually want to protect. Because if you go with this blanket approach, I don't think you'll get much buy-in. There will be people, including us, that may be okay with saying, look, I let go of like 50% of my land for the future generations at no, with no benefit whatsoever. But I'd say that's like a real minority, and it would require anyway a lot of renegotiating of mortgages, borrowing, banks. I mean, it's just a can of worms. So that would be, I do think that rate rebates would be great, giving the possibility of opening those pieces of land to public access without having to go through a consenting process, having managed access for paying access, or a lot of Longali, for example, is a black sky area. There's literally no electricity and people live off the grid mostly. But even to consider applying for getting a black sky area so close to the city, the first estimate is more than $60,000, which no one will do. Over to the others for more comments.
On that particular thing, some of my neighbours do actually get subsidies from the Regional Council for pest control. We've never sought one, mainly because we're happy to do it ourselves, and I think councils have a lot to do other than that. But I think one of the things people got to recognise is that the gullies are almost naturally protected at any rate. Now that there's no longer intensive farming going on, particularly in Karori Valley, because they're quite steep, and the bush is starting to get extremely attractive. You would have to be a really strange person to think it was desirable to cut it down, because you're not going to be able to get anything in there. The amount you could get off livestock wouldn't compensate for that. And then the tops are really relatively flat. Not at the moment in South Karori, but at some point I can see in Parkvale Road. I used to live in Parkvale Road, just number 100, not number 200. But I can see that's close to the city. It's but the one interesting thing about South Karori Road is it has 2 sewer pipes down, and it has a lot of infrastructure that's already here. Only bit of infrastructure is a bit short of the road, but there's a largely unused sewer that runs from out in front of my place. It's not the main one. There's a major one for Karori as well. So areas like this are where you can, I think, combine use and so forth. In terms of Eleanor's comment about the dark sky, we actually do go into Long Gully in terms of our property, and I can back up. It's lovely up there in the night.
Yeah, it'll be photo
I
catch up, right?
think about a dark sky Long Gully, some part of it, and then look at that as being an aspect of how it gets double utilization out of the place. So it is, gone a long way from the days when it was Mr. Moody's pig farm. And I don't think it's going to go back. So I don't think you need to be too nervous about it, which I think the SAL proposal sort of suggests, and the SNAs, well, I think they're going to have unintended consequences that are just not thought about. And sounds good, but central government may have it in their head, but I think they're screwy. But they're screwy about a number of things, and that doesn't matter which party's in power. Anyway, I think it is a dark sky area. It'll probably just happen at any rate, but it needs to be a bit of access to it. At the moment, for example, there's no access into the Long Gully Bush Reserve that's effective or achievable by people, and all they can see is the trees, where they need a bit of access to be able see the fabulous sky. There's also great glowworms down here. I don't know if you know that, but
Yes.
these gullies are full of glowworms, so just fantastic at night.
Yeah. I mean, the council is trying to develop Hawkins Hill and have some sort of bike park. I know I've made a submission on that, and there's been quite a bit of debate. And at the same time, it's like preventing subdivisions from Long Gully Station by saying that there's not enough, that the access is not good enough, and it's going to ruin the rural character of the land if cars are allowed. But at the same time, you kind of want to develop it. It would be good to sit down with residents and actually nut out what you can do with that area, because there's a lot of potential. And at the moment, it's just being quite fraught relationship with council. SNAs is not going to help. People are just going to like kill all the trees, really. So if we could avoid that, it would be great.
Okay, thank you. Adam, oh, sorry, that's enough. Okay, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Adam, are you able just to maybe give a bit of a response about what the restrictions are, because that does tend to be where the argument is?
Sure. Yeah, so there's a lot going on here in the conversations that we've just had. But so in terms of the SNA provision, so we did hear from a number of submitters throughout this consultation process that the rules aren't flexible enough to allow for use of land. So they do set out some general parameters already, but we heard that they aren't flexible enough. So in terms of walking tracks and access tracks, that's generally restricted to farm access or public access. We heard that should actually be amended to be flexible and include private access. So we've heard a lot of that through the submissions process, and we are going back to provisions with a view to see can we make them more flexible, yet still retain the intent, which is the protection of significant natural vegetation. In terms of the incentives front, we did hear a lot again through the submissions about there needs to be a bit of give and take. So Councillor O'Neill touched on some of the incentives that we heard through this process, including rates for emissions, fencing subsidies, free advice, provision of plants, and pest control, and we'll be reporting back to Council what we heard. I note that that incentives package is what we do for other types of values within the city, like heritage buildings and heritage areas. There is that bit of give and take there.
So can Eleonora gave us some very good details about what she might not be able to do on her land. Are you able just to give a bit more detail, because obviously we are trying to become sustainable in terms of food too?
Yeah, so under the current SLA provisions, vegetation can be removed if it's to ensure the operation of a public road or private access leg, to clear vegetation away from buildings up to 3 metres away, for flood protection, for fire and emergency purposes, to enable tangata whenua to exercise customary harvesting, or where there's an imminent threat to property or people, or for the maintenance of walking or cycle tracks. There are also some permitted activity standards there for the construction of new fences, perimeter fences, to control stock and access, and also the upgrading of existing fences. But none of those scenarios match with what Ms. McNara has talked about in her context. So I do raise that.
I do want to say, sorry, I don't know how to find my yellow hand. I'm sure
Oh,
there's
no,
a
that's
way.
right. That's right. It's fine.
Okay.
It's fine.
I do want to say that a lot of those allowances for cycling tracks and walking tracks, and even the tangata whenua one, is only applicable in the proposal to public land. Yeah. So I wouldn't be able to actually do a cycling or walking track on my own land if you go ahead as proposed. And this is really getting people quite upset. As you can imagine, you buy a beautiful piece of bush, you want to walk in it, and you're not allowed to do it. So yeah, I mean, if we want to have a conversation, Adam, outside of this, so if there's any way for me to like strengthen how, if there's a way of helping you out, if you do go ahead with the SNA, because I know in other jurisdictions and nearby councils, they decided not to do it because there was too much opposition. If for some reason you end up going ahead with the SNA, even though you've had thousands of people tell you not to do it, I would be delighted to talk about the rules so we can change it.
Cool. Yeah, certainly in terms of how we've got to where we have, we've talked earlier about the direction in the Resource Management Act, and also there was Council's commitment in 2015 under the Natural Capital.
Yeah, it is also true though. I mean, you will be, the Resource Management Act is going to change. This is going to impact Council, Lens, and everyone else's. So it would be good to have a conversation that's very focused, noticing that like in next year ledge program, there's going to be no RMA anymore. So
yeah,
would be good to be aligned.
Certainly heard loud and clear that we need to revisit these with a lens, and picking up on Councillor O'Neill's question about beehives, and you had another one there around growing your own food. If you had to remove significant natural area, if you had to take bush out to do that, it wouldn't be a permitted activity.
It would be great, yes. At least not having to go to council for things would make it a lot simpler. Sorry.
Sorry, Adam, you said it would be a permitted activity.
It would not be a permitted activity.
Oh. Okay. So we've got some discussion to have there. Yeah. All right. And Adam, just in terms of John and Tom's submission, you'll just look at that.
Yep. So we received
yep.
a number of rezoning requests throughout this process. Each of them will be looked at on their merits and considering what are the planning constraints that are currently on those sites, what are the other opportunities for, say, access, infrastructure, and looking at the site-specific detail there around the Vera public access tracks that go through it, for example. So each of those will be looked at on their merits. They'll be considered through and detailed through our Section 32 process, and then they'll be rated either which way through our district. Take up the conversation directly with you guys if that's something that you would like to pursue. I would need to check in with the person who's considering those submissions to see where we're at in terms of the consideration.
Thanks, Adam. Those direct discussions are welcome and work together in terms of what might be of assistance to council and in terms of the decision making. So, thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Tom.
Right. Good. Jenny, Simon, do you have any questions? No. No. All right. Well, think. Oh, I guess
Iona.
Yeah, Simon, sorry.
If I could say that the speakers at this forum were really compelling. There've been some alternative views that have been expressed. I think Adam acknowledged that earlier. It's really good to hear, and it shows the value of these forums.
It does, and also the value of having officers right here, so we can
yeah,
have some
absolutely
direct answers. That's been helpful.
Yeah, and it's great to hear from rural property owners, because I think this is the first lot of people we've had that I've heard from rural property owners. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us so we can get our heads around that aspect of the issues.
Absolutely, well said, both of you. Brent, sorry, just one last question. I mean, I'm interested in that point about basically classifying land for public benefit without cost to the ratepayers. So, sorry, without compensation to the landowner. So, what would be a satisfactory regime then? I mean, how would we work that out?
Well, I think the first thing the council, I'll go back a bit further, is actually working out, and I'd use a stated choice approach to it, which means people have to make trade-offs, and it's a recognised method that economists use. I'm by training an economist, you may be aware, but you may not. And so you do stated choice to actually work out this trade-off between affordability of housing, which is a key issue, and sustainability of the environment, which is another key issue for the community. And where is that particular trade-off in the view of Wellingtonians? And there's very well-established methods to do that. Once you've got that, you can then start looking at what sort of ratios and distributions of reserves do we actually need, and the types of reserves we need, with, as Eleanor, I'm sure, would jump in, with a future focus, not a past focus. You know, what you need, therefore, some degree of flexibility. So once you've done that, you can then start saying, well, what should we be looking at as a policy in terms of this? I think, if I may be a bit blunt about it, I think it's easy to go around saying, oh, let's have this area, let's have that area. It's not and people say, oh, that's a good idea, because they're not actually looking at the trade-offs that are being made, even by them. The trade-off of their children and grandchildren will have to live somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a couple of, I totally agree. And I think doing like a state of choice analysis, there will be plenty of analysts that literally are dying to do this, like Āmua and many that have worked on this policy and engagement. I think they would be delighted to do it. I doubt that it hasn't been done. You know what I mean, Brent? Someone must have done this and decided, let's give it a go, because the cost of compensating landowners is actually relatively high. I mean, just like a Google search of like what SNA's impacts have been calculated on in different council areas in New Zealand. And those are the council areas where eventually they decided not to do it. It was up to like 25% of the market value of the land, which for a piece of land like mine will be like $500,000 or something. You know, so it just becomes that all of a sudden you go, am I going to give $500,000 to Eleonora so that I can have some park that no one can use? Or should I spend $500,000 to do affordable housing somewhere else? Or should I give an incentive to people to actually protect the land that council already supposed to protect? There's been like an invasion of like weeds all over Long Gully just because council parks and recreations, they haven't been able to manage the land that they're supposed to be managing already. And there's going to be a burden on landowners to either retain the significant natural areas and essentially continue to do weed control on their own, or come to you and reassess them in like 5 or 10 years and say, it used to be a significant natural area, but now because there's been no weed control around it, it's not there anymore. But yeah, in terms of compensation regime, you'd have to think of the value of the land and the impact on the value of the land. And that can range between 4 to 25% according to SNA calculations in other councils.
Okay. Now that's very,
and there are people, Alan is right, there are people who do specialize in doing this stuff. And it's important that people actually, it will only give you ballpark figures, but it certainly requires it to be consistently considered. There's no point, as Eleanor is making, spending a fortune on something just because one party is going to bear it and you can make the decision, when the community would actually be a lot better off with, say, better amenities and in current sports facilities, or access to cheaper housing. And that, I think, is, you know, going to help the council if it does this. I suspect the council's got into a planning mode. It's thought too much about the RMA, which everybody knows is a fundamentally flawed instrument. I made a lot of money out of environment court appearances as an expert witness for various parties wanting to put up wind turbines. It's not a useful instrument for you to actually focus on. So I was concerned that your staff members saw the RMA as the source of defence of SNAs. Let's look.
I mean, until they change it, Brent, you know what I mean? We have another, what, 12 months, 18 months of RMA.
It may not get better initially, but eventually people are going to work out these trade-offs are really important to them. And, you know, one can see the rising concern about the affordability of housing in New Zealand. Yes, the last burst is not due to council land availability and council policies, but the underlying for the last 30 years has been.
Right. Oh, Councillor O'Neill, one last question.
Thank you. If I could just respond to that, acknowledging the comments that are said, just to acknowledge here. Sorry. Can you hear me better now?
That's better, thank you.
If I could just respond to that and thanking everyone for their contributions. We are consulting on the district plan, and so with that comes a lot of planning and acknowledging our frustration with the laws that aren't working quite well for one another. But I just wanted to acknowledge that our team at Wellington City Council has done an excellent job at planning out these things for the community, and that's why we're so happy to take on all of your feedback here today. But just to signal that, you know, as a city council, we are trying to plan well into the future, and that's why these kind of tedious conversations need to be had sometimes. Even though, you know, Eleonora and Brent acknowledge we need more weed control, we need more tools and action plan. But today we are talking about a plan. So just to respond and acknowledge the points that were raised.
Thank you, Terry. And look, this has been a really useful conversation. Thank you. You know, we don't usually get to have such rich conversations. So it's been a good forum. So thank you very much. And obviously there will be more conversations as we go to the lead up of the district plan. In fact, the working group will be having a session on the SNAs. So Thank you very much. Again, have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
John Morrison, would you like to
Yeah.
introduce yourself?
Okay, yeah, I'm John Morrison from Churton Park. I'm a retired civil engineer and spent my career in local government engineering in Wellington, both city and regional council. For many years, I was an active member of the Churton Park Community Association. Although no longer on the committee, I still maintain a close interest in community affairs.
Okay, thank you very much. Simon.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Simon. Welcome everyone. I'm the local city councillor for Onslow Western Whārangi Ward.
Thank you. John Palmer, should we try you again?
It's better. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly, thank you.
Yes, sorry about that. So I'm here on behalf of Karipa Dell Developments Limited and Boston Real Estate Limited.
Thank you very much. Fleur?
Kia ora, Fleur Fitzsimons, councillor for the Paikawakawa Southern Ward.
Thank you. Hamish?
I'm here with John Palmer, even though it says Creswell with Boston Real Estate and Creeperdale Developments, and John will do the presentation on our behalf. So I'm just here to make sure he does an outstanding job.
Lovely, thank you. Rod?
Hi there, I'm Rod Halliday. I work as a planner for a number of development companies out in the northern suburbs. So that's Lincolnshire Farm, Hunters Hill, Best Farm and Ohau Land and Cattle, as well as Stebbings Farmlands. So they are developing Churton Park and Granada Village. So I do all of their consenting, district plan submissions, and a bit of project management stuff as well for the subdivisions through to titling.
Lovely, thank you. Jenny?
Kia ora, I'm Jenny Cordy. I'm the councillor for Takapū Northern Ward. I live out in Tawa, so I'm from your neck of the woods there, Rod.
Great. Terry?
Kia ora everyone, I'm Councillor Terry O'Neill and I represent Whārangi, the eastern suburbs.
Thank you. Simon? Have you already introduced yourself? Sorry. Yes,
Yep,
sorry.
I have.
Sarah? You're on mute.
Usual, I've said that to a few people today too. Kia ora, I'm Sarah Free. I'm in Motukairangi, Eastern Ward Councillor and Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Adam?
Kia ora, Adam McCutcheon from the District Plan Team at Wellington City Council.
Thank you. Heidi?
Kia ora, I'm Heidi Mueller from Democracy Services.
Wonderful, thank you. And kia ora, Iona Panat, Pokihino Ward Councillor and the Chair of this committee. Right, so basically the way we run this is people have 5 minutes to give a little bit of a presentation, just some key points, and then we'll have some questions and discussion. Who would like to go first? Anyone want to? All right, Rod.
Yeah,
people.
That's fine. Yeah, no problem. Look, so we've put in a number of submissions. Unfortunately, I don't know how they've come through for you, but they were allocated various reference numbers just because I had some of the issues I had on the last day uploading the submissions, but I've got mine all printed out. The general theme, I guess, is what I'll focus on rather than reading through them, is just on ensuring that areas such as Churton Park, the northern part of Churton Park, Stebbings Valley, and particularly Lincolnshire is facilitated for development through the district plan in its new version. And I'm not sure if you guys are aware, with the Lincolnshire farm area, it's been subject to a structure plan that was introduced as part of a plan change 45 number of years ago, maybe 15, and that's supposed to be carried through in a similar kind of vein. Some of the issues we've got with it, just at a high level, are to do with the provision of some of the community infrastructure, including parks, which we're obviously committed to providing a community park similar to Newlands Park in that area. There's also Ministry for Education who are looking for a school site, which is logical. and there's also another area of land that's required for, I think it was, yeah, this community park, and there was another area required for a community centre. So no issues with that, providing that. I guess what needs to be sorted for us is that one is acquisition of that land, and two, the delivery of that land. And it's quite clear in this draft document that it needs to be delivered in a flat format. And so when you add up all of those areas that are required, it sort of comes out at quite a high 6 to 7 hectares of flat. And I'm not sure if any of you are aware of the challenges of getting resource consents for bulk earthworks from the regional council. But I spent half my life dealing with them, and it's not fun. And I guess the message from us is that if it's going to be required as part of the new plan, there just needs to be some buy-in from the regional council, which is very difficult to get. We've been told in no uncertain terms that bulk earthworks for greenfield development are a thing of the past and are going to become virtually impossible to obtain. So I've just got some concerns around having those requirements for these areas being flat. So that's really the main point for Lincolnshire. The other points that we made in our submissions were just to do with some other areas of land that we refer to as the Reedy block in Churton Park, which was a special housing area that's now been earthworked and is ready for residential development, but has remained zoned rural in the draft plan. So we see that as an issue. And there were also some comments around the significant natural areas that have been scattered around our sites and the mechanism being used to achieve the outcomes being sought on the private land. I've seen there's been quite a few submissions to the plan along that similar vein. And then the last one, I guess, big one, which I'm not sure if has come up, but is assisted housing, the new policies that have been introduced for that, or the options for achieving some form of assisted housing in the city, and just a vehicle which that is being used to deliver. I guess the intent is there, it's just how you obtain it. And the option 4 that we were reading, which was to require all subdivisions and multi-unit developments to pay a financial contribution equivalent to a certain percentage of the total land or floor space, is quite a significant change or proposed. I know you've got 4 options to try and achieve some form of assisted or social housing, but the developer is against option 4 at this stage, and believes that will essentially limit growth of residential housing in Wellington. Just in my last minute to speak, I guess it's worthy to note now what the implications are going to be of the Resource Management Amendment Act, which has been introduced since all the work was done on the district plan. I know much to the frustration of the district plan team, and I've spoken to Tim Johnson and other people about how you're going to bring those requirements in to this planning process. He's explained to me what the intent is with rezoning a lot of the general residential land to medium density. I do have some concerns about the government's sledgehammer approach that's been brought in terms of the urban fabric and residential amenity values. Not much you guys can do about that. But if everyone puts 2 units on their property and there's no controls at all, it's going to look pretty bad. So yeah, there's a number of things at play, but we are following how you're going to integrate that and the rules around that and what it means for your even higher density areas around your transport hubs. So that's it really. Pretty hard to sort of sum it all up in 5 minutes, but that's it.
Thank you, Rod. That was really clear and very helpful. Thank you. Now, John Morrison, do you want to follow, given you're also Churton Park resident?
Yeah, good afternoon. My submission is summed up in one sentence. There must be provision for road link between Tahoe and Upper Stebbings Valley. Let me go back into history. When Tawa Borough Council approved the Greyfriars subdivision in the 1970s, provision was made for the expansion of the borough over the ridgeline into Upper Stebbings Valley. The connection continued from the open end of Greyfriars Crescent. Consequently, much of Upper Stebbings is in the Tawa suburb boundaries. Of course, when this subdivision was underway, Churton Park was several kilometres to the south. The draft document for Upper Stebbings development was completed in 2018. That proposal included a significant number of houses. There was also a road link between Tawa and Upper Stebbings from Sunrise Boulevard, which went through corrections land and also through 2 houses. The owners of these properties were not advised prior to the release of the document. They were, not unsurprisingly, very concerned with the proposal. A meeting was called in Linden on 12th of February 2019, where, according to media reports, the WCC councillors were grilled. To conclude the meeting, the mayor and ward councillors gave the assurance that there would not be a link between Tawa and Upper Stebbings. Because of this assurance given by councillors, WCC staff and the project team proceeded on that basis. I subsequently found out from senior WCC staff that the meeting had not been constituted as an official WCC meeting. No minutes were taken or approved. In other words, the words given, the assurances given were mere words. Subsequently, this current document was prepared. It contains less houses and does not include any connection between Tawa and Upper Stebbings, following the baseless direction given by those councillors. There are 1 or 2 residual words in the plan that are carried forward. The words like well connected, close to Tawa shops and Takapū station, compact urban form, they were residual hangovers from the previous scheme. They don't describe the current proposal. There's 2 submissions in my name. In the first, I list out the many positive benefits for Tawa, Churton Park, and the wider region if this link is included in the plan. The main points were as follows. Cul-de-sac subdivisions are acknowledged as poor planning. Also, the electricity transmission line exclusion zone will create a small enclave all by itself. A public transport link connecting Johnsonville, Churton Park, Tawa, Pūroro, and the Kapiti rail line would be invaluable. An alternative north-south link would increase the city resilience by providing a route from the north into the city for emergency vehicles, as well as being available for pedestrians fleeing Wellington after the disaster. Middleton Road, which is the current pedestrian route, is very, very fragile. In fact, it was just closed in the latest storm. And then community connectivity is one of the key objectives of the plan. Tawa and Upper Stebbings Valley are very close together, but not connected. There's a picture on the front of the plan that you've prepared. You might be able to see, which shows how closely these 2 suburbs are together. I've given some suggestions as to how the negative impact of a road link could be mitigated. Because there'll be no residential properties fronting the connection, grades and widths could be relaxed. And for example, Bing Lucas Drive connection to Takapū Road is a case in point. I went up it this morning, quite narrow, no frontage, a different sort of road from a normal subdivision road. I also mentioned traffic issues. There may be a perception that vehicles will pour over the hill and further choke Tawa's streets. My assertion is that the opposite could be the case, as vehicles from West Tawa may find the better route to motorway is via Churton Park. This, combined with a good bus service, could actually reduce congestion on the Tawa Main Road. Then my second submission contains some comments on the points in the actual document. Many of these, of course, relate to lack of a link, and others are points of correction and clarification. I'd like to highlight a couple, though. I maintain that reserves should be vested at the same time as the adjacent lots are released for sale. This is to ensure that there are not years of delays before reserves are vested and then able to be used. And the second one is that the road link from Glenside West to Westchester Drive should be complete before any lots in Glenside West are released for sale, to ensure that the connection is not delayed indefinitely. Then a final point about significant natural areas. The area between Greyfriars and the development has been included in a proposed SNA. From the wording of that document, some high-quality natural areas, the Redwood Bush, have been combined with adjacent areas of much lower ecological value. as is the land at the end of Greyfriars. My contention is that this low value land should not be included in the SNA so it is able to this link to be built. So in conclusion, my request is the City Council put on hold the current process for this particular area until a thorough investigation has been carried out, covering all aspects of the feasibility and benefits of a link between Greyfriars Crescent and Upper Stebbings Valley. I'm happy to answer questions.
Sorry, we will just go to questions after we've finished hearing from everyone. John Palmer, would you like to speak now? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. I'm just going to, I'd like to share my screen if possible. No, that's not going to work. So we
is enabled, so you should be able to.
It wants me to quit Zoom and reopen it if I'm going to do that. So unfortunately, I'll having wasted time finding that out. I'll just have to push on orally. Apologies for that. So our submissions relate to two properties, particularly at 11 Mako Mako Road in Brooklyn and 62 Kaifawhara Road. Oh, Hamish has shared his one. There we go. Thank you, Hamish. That's just as well he had dialed in. So if we go to slide 2. So yeah, the points that we make are specific to those properties, but they actually raise in principle issues relating to council processes and proposals. And we've already submitted once this morning in a separate forum, and again today I've heard many similar issues raised. Our objection is based around two areas in the draft plan. One is the rezoning of our particular properties, but what they reveal in terms of the arbitrary and unreasonable nature of that, and likewise the process around significant, it says national area, but it should be natural areas there. But we will sort of demonstrate our points, if you like, by reference to the two properties. Yeah, as I say, I think the process, simply by looking at the outcome of the proposals from council, you can see that the process has been arbitrary and has produced unreasonable outcomes. We also have concerns around the way in which the council is implementing its obligations under Section 6 of the RMA. We'll come back to that in some detail if required. But perhaps most significantly, we think that all of this will actually undermine the objectives that the council is trying to achieve. And some comments earlier, I think from Rod around the impact of the current changes to the Resource Management Act contemplated, and densification of housing and whatnot are factors in this process as well. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, to give you some examples of the arbitrary nature of the rezoning at 11 Mako Mako Road, it's been rezoned from rural fringe to large lot residential. That zoning is, I guess, out of step with the surrounding or neighbouring zoning, which has been rezoned from outer residential to general residential. In other words, there's been a sort of, if you like, an upzoning of the land in step, but it hasn't been done with any regard to the actual nature of the land. So perversely, the outcome at Mako Mako Road is that houses directly across the road from that site with the same topographic character, site coverage, etc., have a different zoning, and that will affect the affordability of housing that can be built on that site. We go to the next slide. At 62 Kaifawhara Road, there's been a change of zone as well, outer residential to natural open space zone, or NOSZ. Based on the research that we've done, that setting appears to be targeted at open spaces that contain high natural, ecological or historical value, and appears to be aimed at green belt preservation, particularly with a focus on preserving natural open areas accessible to the public for informal activities such as walking, tramping, running, fishing, picnicking, etc. The obvious absurdity here is that 62 Kaifara Road is private land and is not open to the public for any of those activities. And moreover, as far as I'm aware, there's surrounding privately held properties that have the same characteristics that 62 Kaifara Road have in terms of topographic, unbuilt and bush character, but have not been designated NOSZ. So it appears arbitrary. We certainly haven't been able to discern any logic or reason behind the rezoning. Now, moving on to the SNAs, we acknowledge that Section 6 of the RMA requires the Council to recognise and provide for matters of national importance, including significant Indigenous vegetation and significant habitats for Indigenous fauna, but we think that has been interpreted narrowly or in a way that's potentially able to be described as expedient by looking to introduce a planning setting that essentially designates large swathes of land with a kind of environmental protection without actual detailed regard for the land that's being affected. We don't think that approach is required by the Act. There are other ways that the Council could discharge its obligations under Section 6. And we think that the approach they've taken has obvious flaws and results in arbitrary and unreasonable outcomes. We think that the concept of significant or the baseline that the Council has used is flawed and has set the bar too low. There have been no on-site audits at our sites. It appears to have been a desktop exercise based on aerial photography. To give you some examples of the outcomes of that imprecise approach, we have at Kaifara, for example, the SNA designation lists streams, fish species, birds, etc., as being a reason to designate our property with that setting, despite the fact that there is absolutely no evidence to support the presence of any of those elements on our land. Another example of the arbitrary nature of this exercise, and I think it's simply due to a flawed process, is that we have bush zones that run along property boundaries. So rather than being by reference to physical realities such as contiguous bush areas, we have SNA lines running directly along essentially property title boundaries, which of course have no basis in logic in terms of what the SNAs are designed to achieve. Let me go to the next slide. We have further examples, just as I raised with the zoning examples, where neighbouring sites with similar characteristics receive different classifications. And in particular, in relation to these two sites at Mako and Kaifara, we would note that the bush on those sites are principally mahoe, and while we've done this desktop exercise for the Council, have noted that mahoe is of low ecological value and that the mahoe forest types are very common in the Wellington area. We note that some SNA designated areas don't have any natives. They include Pinus radiata, blackberry, gorse, and old man's beard. In fact, at Mako, there are other things captured by the proposed SNA up there, including a bridge that has been built, which I don't think meets the requirements of an SNA. And to us, it just speaks to the flaws in the process. And given the significant consequences of what the Council is proposing to do with these planning settings, and I think you will have seen in lots of the submissions on this topic, the flavour of the submission is that this is a expropriation of private property. That if that is ever going to happen, and it shouldn't be happening, if that was ever going to be happening, it should be done under the most robust circumstances with the fairest and most transparent process, and of course with appropriate compensation for parties who are adversely affected by this setting. Yeah, and coming back to my final point that I mentioned at the start, we think that the likely effect of this approach and its inherent flaws and iniquities is that it is actually going to undermine the objective of Section 6 of the RMA and what the council appears to be trying to achieve, because the incentive on private landowners is to remove all of the bush that might be subject to these SNAs before they come into effect. And, you know, that is actually contrary, you would think, to the objective of the legislation. It also undermines public confidence in the council's processes and outcomes, and may very well result in litigation, which is undesirable and will hold up parts of the district plan and for years to come, likely.
Thank you. That's the end.
Yes. Well,
Okay.
I can keep going if you want.
No, that's fine. I was just reading all of that. And we've got the copy of that presentation, have we, Heidi?
I've just emailed and asked for a copy, so that will be attached to the minutes.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Right. So I see you there now. Welcome. Sorry, we can't quite hear you. Sorry, there's something going wrong with the sound quality.
I am hugely apologetic for being muted, so I'm not sure if I speak up, does that help? How's that?
No, that's fine now. Sorry,
Is my
Sue,
volume on?
The volume's fine now. It was just
Almost
the
full.
quality as well. Thank you.
I'm assuming the format is still that I just say who I am and then have a 5-minute presentation. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. You're the last one, and then we're going to have some questions and discussion. Thank you.
And Sue, could you just yell?
Oh, right. Yes, I will. I'll turn up my my volume even higher. That's at full capacity, so hopefully you can hear me now. Kia ora, I'm Sue Elliott, and I am representing or want to speak to my submission, which I'm not going to go through word for word because
So it's the broadband quality
that you have.
So do you mind turning off your video and just seeing if that helps with the quality?
Read it, but I do want to introduce myself as not only a resident of Thorndon, but someone who cares deeply 30 to city to live. Absolutely. I'm going to better.
Thank you, Sue.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'll keep my video off, and I've changed rooms, so hopefully that's a bit better. Hello?
Hi. Yes, no, we can hear you, Sue. Go for it.
Oh, you can. Sorry.
Yes. Sorry.
I think, Carl, I'm not sure how far you didn't hear me, but I'm speaking to my submission, and I'm speaking as a resident of Thorndon. But more than that, I am speaking as someone who has lived in the city all my life and spent the last 30 years with a interest and preoccupation, I guess, with making Wellington a better place to live and to visit. And so being a proof of that, I guess, is being a Thorndon resident, I was part of the Wellington Stadium Development Trust, and set myself up in quite bad odour with a number of my neighbours who were anti the stadium, but I saw it as a hugely beneficial thing for the city overall. And when I look at the spatial plan and the way it applies to Thorndon, and in particular the heritage neighbourhood of Hobson Street and Hobson Crescent, and see that it is marked down as central area, or in other words, guidelines as if it was the CBD, I think that that runs completely counter to everything that is good about this city. These particular streets is an area that is particularly important in telling a Wellington story. A significant body of the built heritage represents the first century and a half of Wellington's colonial existence and tells a different story to the working people's cottages in the other parts of Thorndon. So I am supportive of the protection of the subgroup in Thorndon, but would like the Thorndon streets that I have named to remain residential and be included in that group, or at least provided with an inner city status. Hobson Street currently forms a character corridor in Wellington that provides a continuum from Parliament in the National Park heritage area that I consider the National Library and Parliamentary Precinct, up to those working people cottages, and showcases something that is not seen in any of the other areas as a streetscape that the council are viewing to protect. The area includes a huge number of homes over 100 years old, and they reflect the first merchant class that rose up in Wellington when we started to do well within colonial times. And although it is not perfect, and we have the worst thing in certainly Hobson Street is Hobson Court. Hobson Court sits back from the boundary and at least doesn't interfere with the streetscape. There's the German and the French embassies and the Philippine embassy and Highwick, all of which are within the 3 stories that would be included in the inner city zoning. I think what's interesting to know about these homes is that they have gone through a huge number of cycles. They were the merchant classes of Wellington businessmen back in the late 1800s. And then as time changed, they were divided up and became businesses, the homes, or multi-family dwellings. And I don't have a problem with that. Again, what's interesting is the way that Wellington has been organic and grown. These houses, streetscapes have remained the same. So the historical character of the area is still there. Under the current plan, all the houses in the street would be open for CBD guidelines, apart from 1 or 2, or I think 3 houses that have been singled out. But it's actually the streetscape of this area which is so important to the character of Wellington, and I think the livability of the city to have a patina of age and to reflect its history. So when I moved into Hobson Street, where I live, there was the Salvation Army and the French Embassy. There were a number of businesses, a number of multi-dwelling homes, and I personally support that. I can well see that my home will be sold to more than one family, and as long as the character area, which I think is in the interests of Wellington, remains, then that's a good thing. Under the planning, people would be able to bowl these houses, which would fundamentally change the streetscape. And the guidelines say that the buildings that would replace these houses have to be 6+ floors and need take no cognizance of sun or light for the neighbours. Well, this is a complete residential neighbourhood, and for me, it beggars belief that the council have agreed to do this. And if I'm brutally honest, I don't hold out much hope for this consultation, because I've been through this 3 times. The first time was when back in, I think it was 1994, when these streets, Hobson Street, Hobson Crescent, Catherine Mansfield Avenue, were all included in Thorndon's character area. Then we went through it, the first round of this consultation, and actually the officers advised the councillors, having been here and listened to all the submissions and gone through the consultation process, that indeed these areas should be protected, and it should be an inner city suburb rather than a central zone, which gives it CBD guidelines. And councillors overruled that, and I'm now back presenting on the same thing again. So I'm really hoping that you have taken the opportunity to read the submissions, that you listen to what is being said, because I think there are large numbers of areas, including in Thorndon, where intensification can happen, where there is already light to medium industrial zones. And I can think of Grant Road, Thorndon Quay, without even going out of my area, which I am particularly interested in. So I think I've probably used up my 5 minutes. And I thank you. And again, I apologise for being so incredibly late. It was a series of mishaps, I'm sad to say.
Thank you very much, Sue, and absolutely no problem. We know things like that happen. That's all good. Nicola, do you want to start off with a question or a comment?
Okay, so it's a question for Sue. Just mentioning, first of all, even though I can't see you, just remind you that not all councillors voted to put those parts of Thorndon into the central city. Some of us opposed it. And I'm just wondering, we've had quite a few submissions from people in Thorndon, all very much along the same lines as what you're saying, Sue. Are there any residents who've come out in favour of, in particular, the Hobson Street rezoning?
Not a one. And in fact, we had a meeting during the last draft spatial plan consultation period, where we gathered everybody in the street into one place to gather up views. And just on that, I'd like to say, I know there's lots of people who would say we're privileged and we don't want other people to have affordable housing on 2 fronts. A, any apartments built in this area will not be affordable. And B, I think that God, I've lost my train of thought, sorry. It would probably be in my better interests to sell my house to a developer, because they would make a fortune out of putting up 6+ stories of apartments. So nobody is motivated by personal greed. They are motivated by a sincere love of this historic precinct and what it represents for the city.
So just one other question, and that is, you have a lot of embassies and I think a couple of high commissions along there. Have they expressed any views about this?
No, not to my knowledge, but the Thorndon Society may well have. What's interesting is that 2 of the embassies are in the larger old buildings, and both the German and the French embassy are only 3 stories high and set back so that they don't destroy the streetscape.
Thank you. That's it from me.
Thank you, Fleur.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to ask, if no one's in favour of it, doesn't that give you some assurance that it's sort of, even if it's provided for, it won't happen?
Absolutely not, because the people who aren't in favour of it that I'm talking about are residents here. I'm sure if you asked a huge number of developers, they would all be very enthusiastic for just the reason I've said, is that they will make money off these heritage sites because they can build to the boundaries, and they can they are obliged to build 6 stories plus and have no cognizance of sun or light of anybody else. And if they built up to 6+ levels here, they will have sea views and watch those $1 million apartments. So I'm quite sure you'd find a handful of property developers in Wellington who would be only too pleased.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, everybody. I guess my challenge is to all of you. We know we've got a housing crisis, and we know there are a lot of young people who are very distressed because they don't ever see the prospect of owning a home. And we know how important home ownership can be for stability. What would be your solutions if we're going to try and retain the character areas and try and get green space and do all those things? How would you see us providing greater density throughout the city and including in Thorndon? And I guess, Sue, the Thorndon bit was for you, but it is a challenge for everybody.
I could not agree more in terms of the need to provide more affordable housing in Wellington. I don't think that is at the cost of heritage areas that are predominantly still residential, which is what here is. But as I've said, all along Grant Road, there's light commercial, all along not Goring Street, but the other streets that go up, all along Thorndon Quay. And dare I say, I don't think the dust has settled from COVID yet. And there will be vast swathes of inner city buildings that will be empty going forward. And so I have always questioned the numbers that the council have put against Wellington's growth. And there's all of Kent Terrace, there's Cambridge Terrace, there's Adelaide Road, there's all those light to commercial spaces. I mean, the council itself has put up Paddington, I think they're called Paddington Apartments, I might be maligning those. They're 2 stories high, and they're off, is it Tory Street? I mean, that staggered me. I am not anti-development, but I am anti taking away things in the city that make it the livable place it is. And I consider that the Thorndon character area is quite singular, along with a few others and I'm not saying don't do it as inner city. I just don't know why suddenly it's become CBD when it is already comprehensively 95% residential now, and they're not houses that are of poor quality. They are houses of really good quality, and I can see them easily becoming multi-family dwellings again. In fact, personally, I would have no problem with that whatsoever. I think it's the ebb and flow of a city, but to destroy the cityscape, to think that you're going to build affordable housing is just not right. And your officers saw that when they came to look.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, is that a question? We do have some other submitters that we could ask questions of too. So you've got a new question? Thank you.
Yes, thanks. John, it's for John Morrison, just to talk about Churton Park for a second. One of one of the reasons why there was a link road proposed from Stebbings to Tawa was the number of dwellings that were proposed for Stebbings, and there was concern about the pressure it put on the transport links in Churton Park. But with much fewer number of dwellings now proposed in that area, what do you say to the argument that therefore the link road isn't needed because there's going to be so many fewer houses there?
No, you missed the point. The link is of strategic importance to the whole region. You see, that is your way in and out of the city after Middleton Road and the motorway are blocked. So come the big event, or could be a petrol tanker turning over on the motorway, Middleton Road easily often blocked. So Westchester Drive and up Melksham Drive over to Tawa will be the way the city may well be serviced after a major event. So it's nothing to do with number of houses there at all. In fact, the link will be valuable even if there are no houses there.
Thank you. Now, look, I'm sorry, I don't want to leave any of our submitters out. So I have some questions. Rod, I'm particularly interested in more sustainable building forms, just given the impact of the building sector on climate. So just in terms of the homes that you're thinking to build now, do you think there's an opportunity there to really improve the standard above what is envisaged in the building code?
Yeah, 100%. Yep. It's a question of incentivizing it for developers because, as you know, their goal is to produce a house that meets the code, that gets a code of compliance that they can then sell, right? And typically those houses now, double glazed, they're fully insulated, and they do meet a reasonable standard. But to lift that bar further, there's going to have to be some kind of incentive-based scheme around that in the plan. And I know there is kind of one already in the district development contributions policy, green buildings. So yeah, I guess there's already that incentive there.
So you don't think the market will respond to people wanting better quality housing?
Well, even higher quality housing, you mean, because the new houses now, as I said, are double glazed, they're fully insulated, and to lift that bar even higher, I mean, if a new house these days is pretty well insulated. In fact, it's too well insulated. There's not enough air circulation because the damn windows, they seal shut. so they're warm, but to get them even better in terms of warmth and efficiency, either the building code needs to be amended or you incentivize it some other way. But the developers on their own believe meeting the building code is adequate.
Okay, that's interesting. And John, thank you for, John Palmer, thank you for raising all these issues around process. I guess we've had a long conversation around SNAs, particularly in the previous discussion, and about balancing public interest and meeting very significant environmental goals with private rights. And I'm just curious about where you think the balance is.
Well, obviously,
it's a big question. Sorry,
it is a big question, and you can deal with it at a macro level, or you can deal with it at a micro level. At a macro level, you would say that there can be a balance struck where a mixture of not necessarily compatible policies, and I think the affordable housing one is another one that's a factor in this SNA debate. Particularly in relation to our properties, for example, because the proposed SNAs in those two properties would reduce the developability of those sites for housing. But at a macro level, you can balance these things in order to try and adequately address the environmental need while ensuring that people who are adversely affected by that public good are not subjected to an arbitrary and flawed process and are compensated where, following a proper process, that it becomes necessary for them to take one for the team, if you want to put it that way.
It was really everyone for the whole community, but no, that's okay. And look, these are very big, complex questions. So that's really helpful. Councillors, are there any last questions? Look, I'm sorry that, we've there are some big issues here which we could discuss. And Rod, the planners will be taking and John, particular note of some of the technical issues that you've raised. So that's helpful. And so thank you for coming in discussing heritage. We've got a range of issues today, which was really interesting. So thank you very much. We will be considering these issues in some depth and with a great deal of seriousness because they're very, very big issues. Thank you so much. And councillors, I'll see you at 3:40. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, what time?
3:40 for the last session.
Okay,
yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Appreciate it very much for giving us your valuable time today to share your views with councillors. So what we'll do is a quick round of introductions. So Thomas, would you like to start with introducing yourself?
Sorry, was that me?
Yes, sorry.
Good.
Oh, sorry, there's a number of you, sorry.
Sorry, would this be our introduction time?
No, just to say what your name is. Yeah.
Good. Sorry, I'm Thomas. I'm from Vic Labour.
Lovely. And also, Henry, do you want to go next then?
Yes, kia ora, my name's Henry. I'm also from Vic Labour, he can pronounce.
Thank you. Andrew, we've been having lots of email correspondence. Hi.
Kia ora, Iona. I thought you might miss me, so I thought I'd better come along again. Yeah, I'm just here in my personal capacity.
Wonderful, thank you. Jane.
Hi, I'm Jane Mears. I'm just a Wellington resident and want to speak to my submission here, yes, in a personal capacity, just representing myself and my family.
Never just, Jane. Thank you. Welcome. Joseph.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Pagani. I'm here on behalf of the Wellington Chamber of Commerce. I'm Policy and External Relations Advisor for the Chamber. I look after a lot of our government advocacy and our analysis of payment policy. So looking forward to a great chat today.
Lovely, thank you. Terry.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Councillor Terry O'Neill. I represent Te Mutukairangi Eastern Suburbs. And I'm a renter.
Sorry, Simon.
Hi there, kia ora. I'm Simon Wolf. I'm the local ward councillor for Whārangi Onslow Western. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Jenny.
Kia ora, everyone. I'm Jenny Condi. I'm the councillor for Takapū Northern Ward. I live out in Tawa.
Thank you, Nicola.
Hello, I'm Nicola Young, Lambton Ward in the Central City.
Thank you, Sarah. You there, Fleur? Okay, they must be doing something. Heidi?
Kia ora koutou, I'm Heidi Mueller from the Democracy Services team.
Lovely, thanks. And Andrew?
Kia ora, Andrew Wharton from the District Plan team.
Well, kia ora, everyone. Iona Panat, chair of the committee and one of the representatives of Pukehino. And hopefully no children in the background. I've got 2 children, possibly with COVID. So it's a busy household at the moment. Right, okay, so what we just
I'm just, it's Dennis Hunt here. I'm a resident of Kelvin. Yeah, that's okay.
Sorry, I can't, sorry, Dennis.
Yeah, that's okay.
Apologies.
Yeah. Dennis Hunt, a resident of Kelvin. I'm just concerned about some of the provisions of the district plan.
Welcome to you, Right, okay, so what we're going to do, and I will be stricter with time this time, is everyone will have 5 minutes. I will just go like this when you've got 1 minute left, and then that will just allow us to have plenty of time for questions and discussion, which has been really rich today. So I'm very much enjoying it. Who would like to go first?
I could go first if you like.
Fabulous, thanks, Dennis.
Yes, I'm a retired civil engineer and very familiar with infrastructure within cities, particularly water supplies and roading. The reason I am submitting is that I'm concerned about the proposed building types allowed under the draft district plan, and particularly 6-storey type 4B development in the Bolton Street, Aurora Terrace, Salamanca Road areas of Kelvin. In fact, they propose a maximum building height of 21 metres. My primary comments are the draft district plan conditions are too general for this area. and a more refined approach to the developments required, I think, of the plan. And I think we've also got to consider the entrance to the rose gardens as being a pretty key aspect of whatever happens here. Perhaps we could now look at these photos. If we can go to the first photo, please, Heidi. That's a photo I took this morning of an accommodation block down in Aurora Terrace. I believe it was an old convent back in the day, but what I think it really does illustrate is how well that particular site is positioned for the sun. And I think the healthy homes provision of whatever we do is crucial. And I think that's just a good example of how a structure can fit into the landscape and could possibly have another story on top of it. Next one, please, Heidi. This is the top of Aurora Terrace at the corner of Wesley Road. You can see on the left there, the Samoan Embassy has been built. It's a new one. It's got a basement and 3 levels and fits perfectly in without any interruption of views from behind. And then there's that Art Deco apartment block there that also does the same without any interruption of views. Next one, please, Heidi. This is looking from the Aurora Terrace corner up Wesley Road, and you can see on the left-hand side there a pretty big house. It's effectively, it's a 3-story housing block, but there's garages on a garage on the road front. So that shows 4 stories. It does block our house a bit from late sun, but I think that can be accommodated in that area. And the other thing I'd like to emphasise is the distance from the house structure to the houses across the road is something in the order of 30 metres, which I think is pretty crucial for obtaining winter sun. Next one, please, Heidi. This is an old villa viewed from Wesley Road. It's on the uphill side of Wesley Road. So that's sort of 2 stories above to its foundation level from the road at the moment. Next one, please. This is the Salamanca Tennis Club. I just put that in because it is quite a nice spot there. And I don't know if it has any particular relevance, but I believe it is Wellington City Council land. Next one, please. This is a view at the end of, or beginning, I suppose, of Salamanca Road. And the aspect I'd like to show here is that on the right-hand side there, that's a structure that's been demolished recently in a new build. And I think one of the things that's happening here in this area is that new houses are being constructed instead of doing up some of the old houses, just to get this healthy, efficient home thing going on. So that's just an interesting point, I think. Next one, please, Heidi. This is Salamanca Road heading up towards the weather office, and that structure you can see on the left is a garage which actually serves one of the properties in Wesley Road. So they straddle between the two, so it's got access from this level. Next one, please, Heidi. This is the entrance to the Rose Garden at the far end of Wesley Road. It's a beautiful spot, actually, and I think anything you'd want to preserve that, I think, it is the main entrance really to the Rose Garden, and it's a lovely looking area, I think. Next one, please. This is looking down Bolton Street, and one of the things I'd like to emphasise here is because of the topography of the ground, you know, it's sloping down pretty steeply. The houses are basically staggered. They're staggered in height-wise, and they can be built up to 2 or 3 stories without interruption, provided there's either a 20-metre gap between them, or they're staggered and planned so you can preserve view shafts and sun. So, in answers, you know, I suppose in summary, really, this particular one is our own house. I'm just showing the beauty of getting the sun into the house from the northeasterly aspect. It just makes the warmth of the house so much more superior. So in summary, I think, in general, I think probably the whole area could sustain 3-story high houses. But it does concern me if across the road they sold a couple of sites, then a 6-story house shot up or apartment block. So I think stick with the 3 stories with my view. But on the uphill side of Wesley Road, I think based on what I've shown you about the Samoan Embassy and so on, you could probably at points get up to 5 stories without interrupting. So I think the provisions have got to be very specific, I would suggest, to preserve the quality of the area. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for being so clear. That's great. Now, should we go with Vic Labour?
Sure thing. Kia ora koutou. Thank you so much for having us. So as I said, my name's Henry. Thomas and I both represent Vic Labour, which is a passionate group of young progressive people in Wellington with lots of members, I think over 100 active members, and several of them fed into this process. So a big part of our pitch is you don't need to tell us that we have a housing crisis and a climate crisis. Those are our key priorities with the district plan. There's always little reasons to say no to the tough changes we need to make to address these issues. But I really think the council has to keep its eye on the ball. We can't keep holding back our housing, transport, environmental adaptations in our beautiful city for any longer. So in a bit, I'll pass over to Thomas to say a word on climate and environment, then I'll wrap up on density, housing, urban form, all that stuff. But I just want to really impress that I think it's really important that the council listens to the voices of young people in this process who are saying loud and clear that we really need to address these issues with ambition and resolve. The draft district plan does move us towards those areas in a really good way, but we really urge the council to really push back against the conservative limits on how our city is going to be able to develop moving forward. There's always room to refine further, but why not really push the boat out as much as we can? I also want to emphasise that while the Te Tiriti compliance isn't a focus of our particular recommendations here, we really think it's essential that the council actively upholds its Te Tiriti obligations, both in the district plan itself and in this whole process, actually partnering with mana whenua and prioritising Māori interests in this process rather than just consulting lightly. And I'll pass over to Thomas for a couple of minutes.
So I'm going to talk briefly about Vic Labour's concerns with the district plan around climate change. We support the direction, generally speaking, in terms of the district plan seeking to take some of the climate issues a little more seriously. But I think the devil, as always, is in the details of these things. And we fundamentally don't believe the plan goes far enough in its current form. There are a number of sort of things around the edges of issues to sort of curb some of the biggest problems and these sort of small ways in which we're stopping the most serious emitters, but it doesn't really take a strategic approach to how we can reduce emissions overall across the whole city. Really what we need is a plan which enforces carbon budgets across the whole city. And we've seen central government try to take some direction here, but local government needs to take the lead because fundamentally, and without that push from local government, central government isn't just going to do it. And we need to make sure that as a city, we're leading the country to try and reduce our emissions as much as we can. We need to make sure that's enforceable, not just within council interests, but within the whole city. And then a word on adaptation as well. We're getting to the point now where we need to start having some really serious conversations about the brutal, honest truth of the impact that sea level rise is going to have on the city. We're going to lose significant areas, and we're not just going to lose it through the water just going over the top. We're going to lose it through coastal inundation, more frequent and severe storm events. We're going to lose it through the degradation of infrastructure because of the impacts of rising salty groundwater, and we're going to lose it through those sort of one-off events which are going to happen more frequently and are going to create real problems. So we need to start having those conversations. And the district plan needs to start being honest about how we can deal with those problems and preventing development in areas that are going to be particularly subject to those issues, and finding a way to eventually manage our retreat to move away from those areas where we have currently some very high value parts of our city that are going to struggle a lot in the future, and we need to be future focused. The other thing with climate change is that it sort of flows into a lot of the other issues that we talk about. Particularly one of the things is car parking. A focus of our submission has been to try and restrict the amount of car parking that we have in the city, because we want to encourage other methods of transport that are lower carbon. And there are other issues as well, like density and housing, that also tie into climate issues. And I'm just going to pass back to Henry to talk a little bit about those.
Awesome, thanks, Thomas. So I really can't impress enough what a burden it is on all of us young people in Wellington to have to shoulder the rents that really suck up literally all of our study linked debt payments every week. And if we're working, it sucks up a huge chunk of our income if we're working. And that's a really tough thing when you compare to people living in other cities and drives people away. It makes life a lot harder for a lot of people. The central city is extremely important for young people. Many of us don't just work there, we also reside there, study there, socialise there, volunteer, all of those things. It's not just a business hub. Obviously, many of us also live further out with our whānau in the suburbs. But whether it's in the city or in the suburbs, we really think it's important that all the things that contribute to good living and like parks, public transport, vibrancy, safe streets, a rich heritage that's protected, all these things need to be prioritised throughout the city. I particularly want to draw
5 minutes, so if you could start to draw to a close a bit.
Very quickly, I'll draw the attention to the importance of really not caring as much about these height limit restrictions and other restrictions on housing. A few stories here or there isn't going to be what affects people's quality of life. It's all of these other things which are so negatively affected by having not having the densification we need. That links really well to the importance of all the public transport investments, all of those things. Quickly, we really support the stuff about accessible housing, both in terms of affordable housing and accessibility. Those are really important, and we want the council to partner with the disability community in those provisions. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. Yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And we've got a range of specific areas in our submission where we've made very specific comments, so we'd really appreciate if those are looked at. Obviously, you don't have time to go over them, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Jane.
Kia ora koutou. I'm not as well prepared as either Dennis or Henry or Thomas, so I'm just sort of going to speak off the cuff to my submission. I live probably up near Dennis in the Wesley, Bolton, Salamanca area, and I accept entirely that I'm very privileged to live in that area and to own my own house. And I have children of your age, Henry and Thomas, and I know how difficult it is for them to afford rents. And so I'm really not trying to be a NIMBY about all this, but I think not only the district plan, but also the flavour of all the information I'm getting from the council is that our built heritage is not important. And I'm just finding that very distressing. I don't think, I think there are times when houses have reached their sell-by date and they need to be replaced, but I don't think we should be as cavalier as we seem to be about our built heritage at the moment. And I feel very strongly that when you look at cities around the world, and I've in my submission cited San Francisco as an example, people go there to look at those painted ladies, which are so quintessentially a part of San Francisco's heritage. And I think we've got to think about being much smarter in the way we do the district plan so we don't destroy what we've got, as well as needing, of course, to meet the challenges of the future, be it affordable housing or dealing with climate change. It's clear that we need to increase our housing density, but it shouldn't always be at the expense of heritage building. And it just feels to me like it doesn't seem to be getting across the line at all with the council at the moment. And that is reflected in an email I got from you about what the submission said. Right at the bottom, it was like some people said that there was a heritage issue. Well, I know a lot of people who made submissions about heritage issues, and I think it just felt like a throwaway comment. And when we had tourists in Wellington more frequently than we do at the moment, you'd see them walking up Tinakori Road and looking at the wooden houses there all around the Botanic Gardens. And I just think if the council isn't careful, putting 6-storey houses in inappropriate places that will significantly reduce the amenity of existing smaller houses next to it is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And particularly in the Bolton, Wesley, Salamanca area, that does border the the Botanic Gardens. It is a place where visitors spend a lot of time, and we have to be careful not only to build to the topography of the site, which is extremely steep and unstable in this earthquake city of ours, but also we have to be encouraged to build in a way that's appropriate to the whole area. Thank you.
Thank you. Very clear and quick. It's fantastic. Right, Andrew.
Kia ora koutou. I mean, if Jane thought she wasn't prepared, I hate to see what I'm going to be like. Thank you all for letting me speak. And my submission itself was quite specific, and that's primarily because I ran out of time to do it. So I will expand on it slightly here and perhaps bring it more in context. But my submission itself was talking about a piece of, or a bit of land on Karo Drive, which is currently a Wilson's car park. You may be familiar with it. Between Cuba Street and Victoria Street, there's a big Wilson's car park there. And essentially my view was that spaces like that should be reclassified as open space zones, because they're prime examples of where we could have more green space in the future. And this one in particular is owned by NZTA Whakatahi, and they, as you know, a government body, are also quite invested in mode shift and in reducing car dependency. And so taking these plots of land that are currently being leased to Wilson's car park or the like, especially by public bodies, and rezoning those for future green space, I think is a really easy win for the council. I know there's a lot of focus on parklets and expanding our green spaces, and so through zoning and things like this, it seems like a good way to do that. And speaking more broadly, I'm very supportive of a district plan, of the move away from car parking and the move away from all of those misuses of our public space. And I guess one word of caution to councillors based on some of the submissions I've seen is that there's a lot of talk around electric cars and needing parking for those. And I just think that mode shift is the council's priority, and we need to keep that at the top of our mind when we're thinking about how we're zoning these spaces and what we want to use the scarce resource for. But yeah, I'm very happy to see the focus on green space and on climate change and all those other aspects of the district plan. And I thank councillors and officers for their work in that, and hope that that can be maintained into the future as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. Really, really succinct as well. Joe, last but not least. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I'm here to express the Chamber's broad support for the district plan and the contents of it. It's good for business, and what we need from a plan that looks at Wellington's housing is to address, more than anything else, the shortage of housing in Wellington and the shortage of other building in Wellington. We all know the stories of how it's hurting our economy, of how it's pushing people into homelessness, how it's hurting rents, and that's very much showing up in the business sector. There is a major shortage of skilled talent for the top businesses that we need. I know anecdotally, a lot of the businesses that we speak with say that even when they're offering some of the most competitive wages in the country, those wages are being eaten up by rents, by mortgages. And in a post-pandemic world, where, especially in the tech sector, where the top tech companies can come from around the world, can bring people in via remote work, we're increasingly seeing these employees, these top tier employees, move out of the central city and away from Wellington. Beyond that, between Omicron, between the protests and a number of other factors, we're really seeing a strain on the central city at the moment. Just about every day, I can tell you another classic Wellington business, especially in hospitality and retail, that has gone under. And it's really tragic to watch. And ultimately, a plan that, even in the longer term, wants to bring and facilitate 50,000 people to 80,000 people moving into the central city is a good one. That's going to be good news for business. It's going to be really good news for our city going forward. So we support the principles of building more houses and really want to express that. There are a couple of other areas within the plan that we just wanted to point out could be improved on as well. One is from our colleagues in the Property Council, who have mentioned that the wind test for buildings at, I believe it's currently 21 metres, is a deterrent to construction at the moment. For a Tīroro property to meet the new minimum height standards under the plan, that would push them over the threshold to require a wind test, which can take up to $25,000 and 6 to 9 months, which is time that, given the severity of Wellington's housing crisis, we just don't have at the moment. Beyond that, we want to, and this is probably part of a broader conversation about Wellington's future, but express the need for a logistics plan for Wellington going forward. So a plan to incorporate supply chain, freight, and just getting products to market for home delivery, which is something we've become much more accustomed to since the pandemic. And it's something that Wellington isn't really addressing at the moment. A lot of our logistics is done out of Palmerston North or Canterbury, when in line with the council's carbon targets, the change from ordering online rather than driving and going to a shop can quite distinctly impact the carbon emissions from a purchase. So we want to express our support for the council looking in the longer term to incorporate a logistics strategy for Wellington. That's probably bigger than just a district plan, but we'd like to see the conversation start within this plan as well. And the other point I wanted to make is that the council should align itself with central government's plan around electric vehicles on this. There is, to some extent, a concern that the council won't enable, whether through getting rid of parking or through preventing the construction or not incentivizing the construction of EV charging stations, that we won't meet the central government's targets to transition Wellington to be an electric vehicle city. So we just want to ensure that that is carried over into the discourse about the plan as well. But broadly, it's a good plan and we really do support it. We support the principle of building more houses. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being so succinct, everyone, and there's some valuable input in there. Right, councillors, is there anyone? We have got till 4:30, so there will be plenty of chance for discussion and questions. Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, I've got a question for the Vic Labour people in the chamber, but maybe if we start with the Vic Labour folk. Can you just talk to us about the issues with student accommodation now and whether you think there's an opportunity for the university to partner perhaps with the council and maybe even the government around addressing affordable student accommodation and what might happen if we don't?
The first thing, thank you for the question. The first thing I thought of when you said that was the Gordon Wilson flats. I hope they were able to figure something out with that. But looking more broadly, I mean, I'd love to see them discuss it and see what they could come up with. I don't have anything on the top of my mind, but I think it's very clear that if nothing big changes, obviously the problem is these supply changes will take a while to bed in, but the best time to do it was 30 years ago. The next best time is now, right? If it's not addressed, we haven't seen the construction in Wellington that we've seen in other cities in the country, so we're going to keep seeing that rents not ease as much as they would otherwise. So that's just going to mean more and more people choose not to come to Wellington. They choose to move further out. They choose not to go out and explore the city and take part in the cultural activities. It'll mean people to, you know, get in really unhealthy rental accommodation where they feel like they can't challenge their landlord when they're living in places that make them sick. It has so many implications. That's what jumped to my mind. I don't know if Thomas had anything else to add.
Yeah, there's one thing, which is that we're now starting to get to a point where students are moving away from Wellington because they can't afford their housing. And that's not an acceptable situation. I know at least 3 or 4 people now, friends of mine who have who came up here to study, stayed here for a year, couldn't afford a flat up here and have moved elsewhere and are now studying online. And that means the city is losing those students. Those students are losing the ability to study in the city. And ultimately, you know, we're losing out on the vibrancy of having students in our city and having that many students. And so that's really a huge problem that council has to address.
And sorry, just I think it's kind of galling to see that the character housing areas in like Newtown and Mount Cook, where students want to go in flat, where they're living in mouldy flats, those are protected housing where you can't get these multi-unit dwellings because it's all protected because they're 1920 flats and stuff, and that's just kind of a baffling priority for me. So I think it's really good to see that those are really being shrunk back, and I'm glad to see the council's gone with that decision.
Oh, and just my question for the chamber, Joe, is around, you mentioned a logistics plan. Is that something that you're saying is critical to like dealing with the infrastructure and building of houses, or is this sort of just a parallel point that you want to make? And can you just unpack it a bit?
It's part of a wider plan, I think, for Wellington. I think improving supply chain and logistics within Wellington will help the construction of houses, because it has been a major factor in the shortage of building materials that we've seen, particularly in the post-COVID landscape. And it also affects how and where people live, because a big part of what people look for is how they, where they can move to, where they can go to shop, to visit these places, and having a city where it's easy to get things delivered to you easily, and a plan as well that reduces traffic congestion by putting logistics vans, for example, in place of just car trips day to day to the shop, does make the city easier to get around in. So it's a factor, but it also is part of a much wider conversation with Wellington that we'd like to see across the other works of council.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, I was also going to ask about the logistics plan, because it's the first I've really heard of it, but it interested me. Does that mean like thinking about where warehouses are, you know, and what streets would be used by big trucks? I'm just not quite sure I'm clear about what sort of things would be included in a logistics plan, but agree with you that it sounds very important.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, well, having a warehouse in Wellington to start with would be the ideal, because like I said, we're coming from Palmerston North and Christchurch, and having these items delivered to Wellington from there, that factors in to a number of different places across our economy. You know, it's increasingly a first job for people. I believe it's the most common first job now for people in America, and it's often quite well paid. I think Amazon's starting wage is $18 an hour in America, which is the equivalent of about $27 an hour in New Zealand, which is fantastic for a student job, for example. But it filters through across the plan. And like you said, Councillor, looking at where a van could go, what streets to send it down, how it can best service an economy. That kind of thing is something that we want to have, I think, a wider conversation with the council and business on. And hopefully look forward to just more consultation about something like that going forward.
Can I also just ask you, do you think the district plan addresses enough where businesses might go, where manufacturing might go, like those other things that are not residential housing?
I think there's space for more of that in there, and for more discussion about how to allocate that throughout the city. But if the purpose of the district plan, the primary purpose, is to look at residential housing, then that is something that business will be happy with on its own. But looking more is, again, this is part of a wider conversation about Wellington, places like can we create advanced manufacturing within the city? Can we create logistics within the city? I think that should be looked at throughout Wellington.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
I just wanted to pick up on something Henry said, which is that obviously students are really struggling at the moment, and it might have been Henry or Thomas, and we do want to encourage students into our city. It makes it vibrant and lively, and I'm fully in support of that. But I'm just not convinced that being able to knock down character wooden homes in Newtown and Mount Cook and put up 6-storey dwellings is going to solve your problem. And I'm reflecting on places I've seen in Otago, which are 4 and 6 stories high, and they are slums. They're ghastly, they're damp, they're dark, they've been jerry-built by developers. You're just going you're not necessarily going to solve the problem by changing the district plan to make those higher buildings. What you need to do is have better regulation of rental housing, as the government started to do with insulation and so on, and for those regulations to be enforced so that people don't have to live in mouldy homes. But just because they're old, it does not necessarily mean that they're mouldy. I think I've seen exactly the same with new houses and new builds, which are just shocking. So I don't think that will solve the problem. It's not a reason to change the plan.
Yeah, I'll just respond to that quickly. I think the reality when you look at the current housing stock is people are already living in atrocious housing. And you can say what you want about healthy homes, which is great, but people aren't going to challenge their landlords on that, on the bills they get sent, on the moldiness, if they feel like they can't, because then they have to find a new flat next year and their rent will go up $50. If you don't have that affordability, renters are in no position to argue their rights. So you have to have more housing. That's one of the big keys to more affordable housing and better quality housing. And of course, there will be design guides for new housing that will make sure that it's not, I mean, you use the word slums. I really don't think that new apartment buildings are going to be the worst housing we've got in the city, but I absolutely have design guides, have good public places. But the current housing stock, you can't pretend that these current wooden villas are great, places for people to be living in, and there's just not enough of them. We need to build more housing where people want to live and where we can support that housing. And yeah, I think that's a big part of it. But
so I've got two questions now. One for Vic Labour. Thank you for your advocacy on transport. We're still getting pushback on parking, loss of parking when we want to build cycleways. So just curious on what your perspective is there. And also you made a point that you wanted our plan to go further on climate, but I just wanted you to just elaborate a bit more on that. And then I've got a question for Joel as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll address the parking thing first, and it really does tie into climate as well, because fundamentally it's about mode shift, and it's about making sure that when we're talking about the way we plan our city, we're not just emphasizing the current ways of doing things and carbon heavy ways of doing things, and that we are trying to shift towards incentivizing public transport and incentivizing low carbon alternatives to just having a car. And that's really where our position on car parking comes from, which is we don't need more of it. In fact, if anything, we need less of it, because we need to encourage people to mode shift. In terms of the climate plan, where we think it could go more, maybe this doesn't necessarily sit so comfortably within the district plan as some other things that have been discussed here as well, I think are the same. It's really about starting that conversation about how do we as a city lead the country to ensure that we are lowering our carbon emissions. And a big part of that, I think, would be some kind of comprehensive strategy to lower and budget our emissions across the city, and work out, start at a point where we have a certain amount of emissions that we've got to cut. And so that means we only have a certain amount of emissions that we can produce. And then we go from there and we work out in which places in the city do we want to be spending that budget, if you like. And then we allocate that and we enforce that, and we make sure that our carbon emissions as a city is coming down. And that's not just internal council assets, that's the whole city. And we want to make sure that we're making progress in that area and leading the country in that area, because I think we have an opportunity to do that right now.
Just quickly, Joe, who pays for earthquake-prone buildings? Someone's got to pay. So where do the costs lie?
So was that to me?
Yeah, I just want to know the Chamber's position on that. Is that a public or a private responsibility, or a mix of both?
I would have to check our overall position on that, but I would say it's a mix of both.
Okay, useful. Terry.
Thank you all. My question is to all of the submitters that have spoken to us today. Focusing on the district plan, we've got a mix of people from different groups, and acknowledging the young people who are probably a part of the generation that's going to rent for the rest of our lives. What specific things would you like to see in the design guides for new builds in Wellington that would make you comfortable whether you are someone who values local heritage and there's a new development coming in on the street, what would you like to see to make you comfortable, or for other people, what values do you want to spot in the council's guiding policies around new builds?
Perhaps I could comment on that, Terry. I think the big thing is making whatever we build, whether they be apartments or houses, whatever, energy efficient. And I've gone through this a lot in my life, and I think it's the number one is sun, actually. If you can get, use the sun to heat your house, to power your house. And I have had experience with a new build where we use photovoltaic cells on the roof, and we just altered our lifestyle, where we, instead of doing the washing in the morning, we set it for midday and that sort of thing. And you can actually, make improvements like that. But the overall thing that really makes for efficient houses is access to northerly sun. And it's particularly important in the middle of the year. And I think any of the design guides, I think to me, that's probably the most important of the lot, because I hear Henry and Thomas talking about that, and the mouldy old homes and that. And that's what we want to get away from. I agree entirely. But it's sun. Southerly faces are not particularly good for it. So I think any northerly face we've got to utilise the best we can.
If I can just say a couple of things.
Yeah, sure, Andrew, go for it.
First of all, I live in a really newly built apartment, and if anything, we have the opposite problem, that it's too warm in summer. So I think a lot of new builds are certainly getting much better in terms of design guidelines and council regulations. So I see positive things there. But for me, I think one of the biggest things that's lacking, and I don't know if this is a design guideline thing, but perhaps it's a district plan thing, is around things like a 10 or 15-minute city and having more of these neighborhood structures coming back into our lives. So when you're building these new apartment buildings, having nearby shops and nearby restaurants and parks and things, so you're not having to always go into the CBD or always drive somewhere. You can stay local and do things in your community, which also has a bunch of benefits in terms of well-being and community spirit and all of those things. But I don't know exactly how you fit that in, but I think that's a really essential part of when we're looking to scale up our housing stock and where people are living.
Good. Henry?
Yeah, I think that's a really good, I think a lot of it's probably a bit technical for me to get into, but I don't think that a lot of what I've seen is about the height limits, the setbacks from the side, back and front. To be honest, I don't think that's the important bit. I think the important stuff is around having shared spaces and the stuff around the broader community, which isn't part of the design guide. So the public transport routes, the public parks, the safe streets, all those things. I did note we mentioned that we support the stuff about renewable energy and new subdivisions and the good control of stormwater, all those things we really like. But yeah, on the specifics, I think it's important that obviously you want them to be livable in terms of sunlight and all those things, but you don't want to make it so burdensome that you can't have like innovative multi-unit dwellings.
Thank you. Anyone else on that question? Otherwise, who hasn't? Does someone else like to raise an issue or a question that they're interested in?
I would mind, please. I hear about the car parking and the cars, and I agree entirely with that. Actually, I think trying to minimise the number of cars we have in the city is a good thing. And if you work in places like Sydney, over there, our office never had cars in the office. We always went and rented one if we needed one, and that's quite a common thing in a city type places. And I think that's something we could all look at. And personally, I would always need a garage simply to put stuff in, I suppose, and do a bit of woodwork and things like that. But I think possibly you need, a lot of families would need access to one car. But if you're a single person or if you're a student or something like that, you probably don't. So I suppose the amount of car parking you provide could be balanced by the purpose, really.
Thank you. Oh, well, there's so many things that we could discuss. Councillors, any questions? Because there's lots more we could do. We just had a debate yesterday about making our building stock more accessible and more sustainable. So that was a $20 million fund. We've just got to figure out what's going to be the best way to spend it. I'm just curious from most of the public participants, whether you think regulation or incentives are going to be the best way to really increase building quality, because we do have a very low standard to achieve in meeting the building code in this country compared to comparable countries.
I don't know whether that's something I would feel able to comment on. I mean, I think we've seen some pretty awful things happen in Wellington in terms of more modern buildings not standing up to earthquakes. So there certainly needs to be, you know, after the last big set of earthquakes, it seemed to be mainly the modern buildings that had to get pulled down rather than the old ones. So there's certainly something there that we need to think about. There's also something there in terms of energy efficiency and warmth. And I think a warm, dry home is just an essential part of building houses. But I always look back on the leaky building crisis that happened in the through the 90s and early 2000s. And when I talked to friends who were involved in building supply companies, they were so excited at the changes that were going to be made to the building regulations and about these new products that they could bring in and different ways of doing things. And it ended up being completely turned on its head by developers who were wanting to always effectively to take shortcuts. And we ended up with these awful building systems that there's still a legacy in the country of dealing with them. I just think we need to be careful. Regulation is one way of doing it, but we need to make sure those regulations are efficient, and that light-handed regulation through leaky building crisis was just a disaster.
Thank you. Thomas and Henry, if because this is the problem, this is the paradox we get higher costs when we try to improve buildings. Who then pays the cost for that so that students can live in high quality, warm, dry, sustainable buildings?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. Absolutely, there's that trade-off there, and that's important to recognise. You can only get around that to so much extent, but I think that's why with quality improvements, you have to have that push against the restriction on housing. You have to allow for more housing, make sure it's decent housing, but allow for new housing where people want to buy it. And that's just so key there, I think, because yeah, I don't know if Thomas has anything to add there, but that's the general philosophy I would have thought.
Cool.
Yeah, really, really key to that is we don't just need higher quality housing in the city, we need more housing in the city. We need higher quantity as well, because the reality is there just aren't enough. And that's how we put the prices down, is we have more of them. It's pretty simple economics, and we need to make sure that we're allowing for that. And that's really the key focus here, is not just quality, but it's quantity as well.
I think a big factor is that you've got the capital cost, but it's the operating costs of these buildings, whatever we might build, apartments or houses. And I think a real focus on efficient heating systems, use of sun, I keep on going on about it, and use of the photovoltaic thing, I think is worthwhile. Other parts of the country are using it extensively. And in Wellington, you very rarely see it, although this area I live in, it's a fantastic place for photovoltaics, for example. So, you know, I know that doesn't solve your problem. It's for cheaper rent and that sort of thing, but it does solve the problem of less expensive running costs, you know, power bills and so forth.
Hey, thanks, Joe.
Yeah, I just wanted to stress that this isn't a problem that we can regulate our way out of. And there are a number of regulations that can come into play to try and stamp down the negative effects of not having enough houses. That will never solve the problem that we don't have enough houses. We've seen that internationally, countries that have looked at rent control have not solved homelessness, have not solved the quality of the houses that are in their city. They've made the problems worse. What we need to do to solve that is enable business to do what it's really trying to do right now, and that is build high quality houses by making it easy for them. I think incentives approach to doing so are really, really useful. We're very interested, I think, in the and ideas for incentives such as prior consenting for developments that contribute something to the city outcomes contribution or something like that, ways that we can use that to help businesses do what they're trying to do. But it really does have to be through enabling business to build more houses.
Okay, any last comments from submitters? We've got 1 minute.
We were quite supportive of the stuff about the affordable housing provisions, but just to jump on what was just said, if you're making provision for taller buildings, if they include affordable housing, why wouldn't you just allow taller buildings in the first place? It's clearly not that big of an impingement on the city. So I feel like our starting place should be not to start really low and maybe allow a bit higher. It should just be to be a bit more liberal with it, but definitely still a place for financially encouraging affordable housing, we think. Okay.
Thank you for that. That's great. All right, well, submitters, thank you so much for your valuable insights and all the time that you've put into your submissions. They will be taken on board as we wrestle with some really big, complex issues. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ka kite.
Cheers.
Now, have we got all councillors back yet? We're not going to close the meeting today, but all we need to do is adjourn it. But I just want to make sure that we've got people back.
We've got everyone who was in the other room.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, well, look, then I am just going to adjourn the meeting to 9:30 a.m. on Friday, the 11th of March. And then, of course, we have another meeting on the 15th of March as well. So, colleagues, thank you so much for your attendance and your commitment to this process. Very much appreciated.
Longer than an hour, that requires a vote.
So, okay, sorry. So, can I move that and Councillor Paul will second? Can we vote, please?
Just waiting on a vote from Councillor Boone. That has carried unanimously. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And can I just another plea that if we can have a quorum for Friday, it's really important for our community that they get to speak. Nicola.
I'm just wondering, so what about the meeting tomorrow?
Oh, we've got another meeting. That's just the normal Pūroro Āmua one. We've got some stuff to agree to.
Oh, I thought I must have looked at the wrong agenda. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a big week this week, and I appreciate, that's why I particularly appreciate your hard work.
Terribly unhealthy week for us to be sitting on our backside.
We're sitting a lot. Yeah, we are.
I feel I'm aging by the minute, and I've got no wiggle room on that, you know.
Oh,
well, she was sun out.
It's a bit unfair.